I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell blamed Democratic lawmakers for inflation on the Senate floor Thursday. Data released last week showed that there have been 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, which signaled the economy has entered a technical recession. Since then, Republicans and Democrats have argued over the definition of a recession. President Biden and Democratic lawmakers have touted the Inflation Reduction Act as a solution to combat 40-year high inflation. But McConnell said that the legislation will, quote, do nothing to cut inflation in the long term. Blaming the Biden administration and Democratic lawmakers for high costs has been central to McConnell's Senate floor speeches in recent weeks.
Kentucky officials are working literally overtime to deliver supplies to those affected by ongoing flooding. Heat and humidity are rising to dangerous levels in areas that still lack power. My team is helping coordinate relief efforts in any way we can. With the Senate still in session, my state director joined the Kentucky National Guard yesterday as they distributed food and water to displaced residents. Many of the roads in eastern Kentucky are still impassable, so the Kentucky National Guard is flying dozens of helicopter missions daily to drop water, MREs, and vital supplies to Kentuckians in remote areas of our state. My state director was on board as they flew over flooded roadways and homes to visit the community centers operating as supply hubs in areas isolated by rising water. The landings are difficult, sometimes nearly impossible, but the heroes of the Kentucky National Guard will do whatever it takes to reach those stranded by the floods. And that's just one part of the flurry of activity. Emergency responders have deployed boats and trucks across the affected region. In Buckhorn, residents are even loading up horses to take supplies to areas where the roads are literally washed out. It's truly, truly heroic work. This emergency is far from over, but when their neighbors are in need, Kentuckians will always help other Kentuckians. I'll visit the region myself soon to survey the damage and help with relief efforts. While here in Washington, I remain in close contact with those who are out on the ground. I'm grateful to everyone taking on the colossal task of providing for Kentucky amid this disaster. Now, on another sad note, yesterday Congress was shaken by the news that a tragic automobile accident had killed Congresswoman Jackie Worlosky and 3 others, including Emma Thompson and Zachary Potts, members of her staff. Our former colleague here in the Capitol was back home among our fellow Hoosiers in Indiana's 2nd District. In circumstances that are familiar to each of us, long days on the road with trusted aides, meeting with people we represent. By all accounts, Congresswoman Worlosky had 2 stellar young people by her side. At 27, Zach was already a 7-year veteran of her team, having served as both campaign manager and district director. Emma, her 28-year-old communications director, was already a Capitol Hill veteran whose intelligence and drive one former boss described as second to none. The last day's outpourings of grief and admiration demonstrate just how great a hole Jackie Worlosky's leaving behind among her friends here in the Capitol. They marveled at both her tremendous personal kindness and her fierce advocacy for the families she represented. I had the personal pleasure of breaking bread with Congresswoman Worlosky several years ago and looked forward to every time that our paths would actually cross. According to those who knew Jackie best, her infectious passion and boundless energy for service were rooted in the faith that guided her entire life. That faith also led her and her beloved husband, Dean, to found a charity and to spend years living and serving needy people in Romania. Today, we trust that this faith has reunited our colleague with her eternal Father, and we pray that he will comfort Dean, all her family and friends, and those who mourn Zach and Emma in these terrible, terrible days. Later today, the Senate will vote on a resolution to peel back a significant layer of regulatory red tape that's been causing headaches all across our country. Thanks to the leadership of the junior senator from Alaska, this resolution would overturn a Biden administration action that aims to give the federal government even more authority to slow and stall critical infrastructure projects. For years, our Republican government made headway in rolling back some of the countless roadblocks liberal bureaucrats have put in the path of new highways, bridges, and pipelines. We took big bites out of the bloated permitting process. And just last year, Republicans ensured that bipartisan infrastructure legislation included clear limits designed to speed up federal permitting reviews. But alas, earlier this year, the president fired off a far-left executive action that directly contradicted some of that bipartisan headway. Catering to radical environmentalists, the new Biden rule reinstates sweeping jurisdiction for federal bureaucrats to slow down all sorts of critical infrastructure. The Democratic action is taking a process that's already known for years-long waiting periods and multi-hundred-page federal reports, and actually making it worse. Every single Senate Republican is proud to co-sponsor Senator Sullivan's resolution. The future of our infrastructure needs at least one Democrat to see the light as well. Now, on one final matter, a year and a half ago, every Senate Democrat cast the deciding vote for a $1.9 trillion disaster that caused the worst inflation in 40 years. Democrats have crushed working families with runaway prices. More than 80% of the country says our economy is in bad shape. President Biden's approval on the economy is down to 30% and falling. By the traditional rule of thumb, our country is now in a recession, and a supermajority of Americans are aware of it. American families are crying out for relief, but Democrats have decided to spend hundreds of billions of dollars of the people's money on a bill that laughs at the people's priorities. Americans say their number one concern is inflation and the cost of living. So here's what Democrats' taxing and spending spree would accomplish on that issue. It would make inflation worse over the next 2 years, and they'd do nothing to cut inflation in the long term. Even the Democrats' favorite estimates say that their bill would take 9 years to subtract the amount of inflation we've been adding every single week. Say that again. Even the Democrats' favorite estimates say their bill would take 9 years, to subtract the amount of inflation we've been adding every single week. After inflation, in particular, another huge group of Americans say their biggest issue is the overall state of the economy in general. And here's what Democrats want to accomplish on that subject. They want to ram through giant new tax hikes in the middle of the recession. New multi-$100 tax hikes on American jobs that especially target the manufacturing sector, leaving Americans with fewer jobs and lower wages. New tax hikes on American natural gas and crude oil. Higher fees for producing energy on federal land, leaving Americans with higher electric bills, higher utility bills, higher gas prices, and more dependence on foreign countries that don't like us. In a time of inflation, Democrats also want to spend $80 billion to roughly double the size of the IRS so they can shake more money out of the American people through harassment and audits, using taxpayer money to make taxpayers' lives worse. So what do Democrats want to do with all the money they want to drain out of Americans' pockets in the midst of this recession? They want to lavish hundreds of billions of dollars on an issue that exactly 3% of the country says is our biggest problem: far-left environmental and climate spending. American families have been hemorrhaging financially for a year and a half. Working people can barely tread water. And the Democrats' focus is Green New Deal nonsense that only 3% of the country wants prioritized. Big subsidies to help rich people buy luxury cars and new stoves. Taxpayer funding for environmental protesters. A huge catalog of nonsense that would not put a dent in global emissions, while countries like China continue to emit more and more. So I would dare any of our Democrat colleagues to walk up to a working-class American on the street and ask them what the government ought to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on. Well, first off, in a time of inflation, they'd probably tell them not to spend hundreds of billions of dollars in the first place. But I doubt a single American worker or middle-class parent would say, you know what? My top priorities are doubling the size of the IRS and giving my boss a government kickback if he buys an $80,000 electric car. Do you know a single normal American family that is clamoring for this nonsense? Americans want lower prices. They want border security. They want more police and public safety. Americans don't want tens of thousands more IRS agents. They want more Border Patrol and ICE agents. Americans don't want Democrats to regulate us into an even deeper recession. They want liberals to let police officers bring law and order back to our streets. Democrats want to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on a 3% issue while they completely neglect crime and border security and make inflation and the recession even worse. Democrats are catastrophically out of touch with what American families actually do care about. Their approval ratings show it, and their reckless taxing and spending proves it as well. I suggest that for quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.